Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. Thanks for joining us. If you're on Rockfin X or Rumble, you'll be seeing a picture of the guest's book, which is titled Gilded Cage, Their Gilded Cage. And if he looks familiar, if you watch my show often, he was here 2 weeks ago. His name is Rick or Richard Hutto, Hutto, and we went over his earlier book, a most recently published book. The title of that we covered 2 weeks ago is The Countess and the Nazi, An American Family's Private War. So check that out. But when I was looking over his bio, he's an author of other books. And one that came to my attention is this one, Their Gilded Cage, the Jekyll Island Club members. And he was kind enough to send me his book. So I have it right here, which I read through and took notes. Great pictures and a real piece of American history that I'm interested in, kind of like post-Civil War history, the Gilded Age. Like, I think the title of the book is a play on the Gilded Age. But there's a lot of people, a lot of names, a lot of history. And we were talking in the pre-show about it. But Rick Hutto was the first executive director of the Jekyll Island Foundation. He's no longer there, but this book's publication coincided with his executive directorship of the foundation. But he can talk more about that. So, Rick, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. I'm always glad to talk about anything from Georgia since I'm a ninth generation Georgian.
Wow, awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
So you know this area. Like for me, like for the Jekyll Island, there's all these other clubs and famous areas in New York City. And you mentioned the Union Club in the book. But this is kind of an interesting post-Civil War place. Maybe you can talk as a ninth generation Georgian about how this club came about and your connection to it, and we can go from there.
Absolutely. It was really a special time in history. I don't think it could have happened at any other time. But obviously, with all of the islands off the Georgia coast, they were all farming places, but they obviously relied before the Civil War on slave trade. So after the war, the island was going down and down and down because the families who owned it really didn't have the money to keep it up anymore. They were being charged taxes. So a group of them got together and decided they should sell it as a private retreat, sell it as an island where people could come down in the winter and enjoy themselves. And so this would have been in 1886. They interested a group of New Yorkers to come down. But what they did ahead of time is they went out and captured all this livestock and brought it all to the island so that when the guys got there, they couldn't even go around a tree without seeing 3 deer, and 2 possum or whatever, just made sure it was all there. So this group decided they would incorporate as the Jekyll Island Club. They were mainly New Yorkers, although some of the Chicago families came as well. But it was supposed to be sort of between, the Adirondack camps, which were considered sort of rustic, but also not Newport, not that elegant. It was supposed to be somewhere in between. And it ended up being a great place to do business because all these guys would sit around in the afternoon having bourbon, and they would say, there's a new railroad. Why don't you take 50% and you take 20%? And they literally would sit there around the table and do that. So lots and lots of interesting things happened there. Lots of intermarriages between these families as well. The Morgans, the Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Goulds, the Gallettes. They were all really interrelated after a while. Even when they were in New York, they would visit each other's homes. But it was nice to be down on the island. One of the early things that happened, though, was that Alva Vanderbilt, whose husband, of course, was Willie K. Vanderbilt, she thought it was going to be like Newport. So she came down on her husband's yacht. She brought all of her trunks with her for, ball gowns and all that sort of thing. Got there and found out, no, that's not what they do here. They don't dress up every night, in white tie. And so she was disappointed. And she didn't come again, but that was perfectly fine with her husband, Willie K. He was delighted. And of course, they ended up divorcing anyway.
Yeah, interesting. So they had that's one of the interesting things about this kind of elite group is they had big families and all intermarried and like we were talking about Stillman Rockefeller in the pre-show, who wrote the preface to your book.
Right.
And he was the offspring of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, right?
He is indeed. In fact, he's one of the few Carnegie family members who still has a house on Cumberland Island, which is the one just south of Jekyll Island.
If I can find that. If you're watching this, you can see this on the map, to Jekyll Island there. Oh, I see Cumberland right there.
Yep.
Got it right there. I see. And the kind of the so they would summer here. Is that correct? Is this
Well,
a
no,
summer?
basically the season was about January to April, although people started expanding it on either end. Some started coming down as early as Thanksgiving. But the real value of the place, according to all of them, they would get on their private rail cars in New York in cold, wintry January, have an overnight train ride, and wake up the next morning, in the sunshine of the South. So that was really what it was for. It was this winter period. And as I said, they did extend the period, but it began sort of January to April. That was the high season for them.
And that was kind of the history of the area. Is these guys? There wasn't to get the high end Tesla or something like that. It was to have a fancy exotic rail car or railroad or something which you would cruise around. A lot of rail barons were associated with Jekyll Island too.
Absolutely. And of course, there was no bridge to the island. So they would take their private rail cars down to the city of Brunswick, Georgia, which is the nearest one. That's where the train station is. And then they would be taken by boat over to the island. So, of course, that kept the riffraff out. I mean, that made sure that if you were not supposed to be there, you weren't there, and you would only come if you were invited by someone.
Right. So what was the entrance availability? How did people get involved or be allowed to be in the Jekyll Island club?
They had to be voted in, and there was only a certain number of shares that were sold. And once it was in your family, you could trade it, you could sell it. Some members, for example, you mentioned railroads, James J. Hill, who really is one of the biggest railroad men in the country, the Pacific Northwest Railroad. He ended up having 5 daughters who were all members there along with their husbands. And so it became, a gathering place, but also a place to meet one another. A lot of family relationships were merged and made better there.
Yeah, it's remarkable. That's kind of one of the interesting elements. So was they able to find spouses or husbands or things like that. And
Exactly.
I think I was looking up Stillman. He lived till 102 years old. I think he had something like 50 grandchildren or something amazing. Like he was quite a person. Like, so this is just one aspect of this kind of club environment. Also a Carnegie. Like
Yeah.
this is amazing.
Well, the Carnegies, of course, owned Cumberland, as I mentioned earlier, the island just south, but it was Andrew Carnegie's brother, Thomas Carnegie, who owned that. But of course, Andrew would come down and visit. And supposedly, after William died, he was relatively young, but supposedly Andrew Carnegie was in love with his widow, Lucy. Nothing, of course, ever came from that, but they would come and come to the island at the same time. In the book, in fact, there's a photograph of a black tie dinner given for Lucy Carnegie, and Andrew Carnegie is there along with some of the other members as well.
Oh, interesting. And this is a picture of Stillman Rockefeller, made it on Time magazine. And you
He
said
was
he was a great athlete, right?
Yeah, he was called Big Rock. In fact, I think he was the oldest living gold medalist from the Olympics. His son was called Pebbles, sort of, I guess, in comparison to Rock. And then Stillman, my friend who wrote the preface, his nickname's Ula. Most of these families all have nicknames, and they never ever get confused as to who is who. So you're right, though.
Interesting.
This is the original one here in the photo.
And so you said that this is a place for business, but it's not just business, it's also politics. Like these are very connected families with other politicians too, right?
Absolutely. People like U.S. senators, for example, Senator Aldrich, um, he was a member. And when he wanted to start the Federal Reserve Bank, he knew it had to be done someplace where they would have no interference. No one could know what they were doing. No one could try to influence them in any way, because obviously we're talking about big money. So they took a private train down. They all used assumed names. They couldn't even use one another's names in front of servants when they were being served, because they wanted to be completely quiet. And of course, by the time they finished, there was the Federal Reserve Bank all written and ready, all
Right. So
done there.
Right, J.P. Morgan is there too, right? So all these big financial wigs. Um, yeah, that's an interesting story in itself because that year I think it was the Federal Reserve and maybe the income taxes the next year or
Right.
something like that under Wilson. But
Exactly.
fascinating is so this whole island now it's not the same, but back then it just the whole was a Jekyll Island only for the Jekyll Island Club. Is that correct?
It was. No one else could come on the island. There was no bridge there. You could take the boat over from Brunswick for the day probably, but I'm not sure what you would have done because all of this would have been private property. You wouldn't have walked among the cottages as they were called. They look pretty much like mansions to us now, but it was called the cottage colony at the time.
Oh,
And so most people who were not members would never come onto the island at all. There were, of course, servants. There were taxidermists. There were gillies and shooting assistants and all that sort of thing. But they lived in a separate two dormitories actually on the island as well.
how long was the average stay? Do you know? Would they stay for a whole season or a week or two? Or
Most people would come probably for a month at a time. That started to, as I said earlier, expand after a while because some of them had teenagers who liked being down there and would want to go in the water, want to swim or whatever, because there was a swimming pool as well. So people started expanding the period, but originally it started from about January to April and then moved in either direction from there. Most, though, would only come down for a certain length. J.P. Morgan is a perfect example. He would come down in his yacht, even though he had an apartment on the island in the cottage colony. He would leave his yacht there, and for the longest time, I couldn't figure out why we were not able to find the name of his mistress written in the guest book at the club, and that's because she stayed on the yacht when they would come down. She did.
that's
She was
awesome.
obviously recognized as not Mrs. Morgan,
Right.
and so she would stay on the yacht when they came down.
Interesting. And so you said like people would swim. There's a there's a picture of the taxidermist in the book. So they're busy doing things the rich or the elite or the aristocracy do. And like you had amazing meals and dinners and things like that as well, right?
Exactly. Terrapin soup, which was a big deal. Obviously, now you wouldn't be able to have that; it would be outlawed. But at the time, that was regular. There was also, if you went out hunting and you got quail or whatever, you'd bring it back, and of course, you wouldn't do it yourself, but it would all be prepared for you, and then they would bring it out at dinner to put in the middle of your table and serve. Um, there was also golfing. Golfing was very popular at the time, and automobiles were not allowed on the island, but they had little sort of go-karts, things they called red bugs, and those were really popular. Where people would zip around on them, and when the first car was finally allowed onto the island, and it was difficult because a lot of people didn't want it. There were really, really strict rules about how fast you could go, where you could go, what time, what part of the day you were even allowed to drive. So they tried for the longest time to keep it pretty pristine.
And you said that bicycles too kind of took over a little bit at one point, I think.
Absolutely, that's right. In fact, you see these wonderful photographs of the women in all these long dresses riding bicycles. Yeah, I would imagine it would have been a bit difficult to do.
It kind of the pictures are great because you see this lost era and they're wonderfully dressed and the women are beautiful and it's really amazing. The it's also not just kind of business that took place there, but these people were all part of history. Like things that are interesting to me is like these are people on the Titanic, right? And the Lusitania. Can you talk about
Absolutely,
that?
yeah. And also people who did things, for example, the public library in New York. John Stuart Kennedy was the largest contributor to build that library. He was a very active member of the club as well. And then things like, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and all those kind of things. Um, None of those organizations would have been successful at the time without the contributions of these people who were there.
Interesting.
These families really were the backbone of America at the time.
That's incredible. So the New York Library. So these guys, they're it's like that network. If they all kind of agreed on something, a big project, then they would facilitate it, right? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. That's absolutely right.
One of the more amusing pictures is something I didn't know occurred, but is a dinner that these all the men had on the horseback. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that would have been actually in New York City, but it was
Oh,
the
okay.
members here. You're absolutely right. They came on horseback and black tie, and had a tray that was hooked to the top of the horse on which they were sitting, and of course they had servants and everything all around them, and they actually sat on horseback and ate there, drank there, and you can imagine what all the servants were taking care of during that time, particularly since after a while horses are going to excrete something. But that was all just another evening for them. That was the kind of thing they thought was great and enjoyable.
Yeah, that's something else. And who was it? The Astor? I think it was one of the Astors who passed away on the Titanic, right? Is
That's
that
right. Jack Astor, John Jacob Astor the fourth. He had divorced his beautiful wife before taking the trip over. He remarried. Sorry, I should have made that clear. He divorced his first wife, married a much younger woman. They went off on their honeymoon to Europe, and while they were there, she discovered she was pregnant. So they decided to come back right away. And they were on the Titanic. She was saved. He, of course, was not. He went down. And that child, they all had to wait. All of the Vanderbilts were on tenterhooks, waiting to see, when that child would be born, whether it would be healthy, whether it was male or female. And of course, that child ended up getting a lot of money, but not so much as he would have if his father had still been alive to sort of make those decisions for him. But yes, she came
interesting?
back as well, Mrs. Astor, and she was a member even after her husband died. Women were allowed to inherit memberships. Not until probably the 1920s were there a few women in their own right who became members. But they so loved the place that these families just stayed there and just sort of passed their memberships down within the family.
Oh, interesting. Did they? What were the fees like? Did they have like extraordinarily high fees, or how was the place maintained?
It was But there was like a fee structure, obviously, that everybody paid. And then if you had your own house or if you had an apartment or something, basically, right in the center of the photograph, on the far side, you can see sort of the reddish building. That was the first condo in America. There were
Oh,
four
wow.
apartments that were built there. J.P. Morgan had one of them. John Stuart Kennedy had another. They all sort of drew straws as to who had which one. They didn't want to stay just in rooms at the clubhouse, which you can all see along the front here. They wanted to have the same place each time they came back. And if you didn't have your own house, that's what you were faced with. You would check in and they would say, we have these 3 suites ready and waiting for you. But Morgan and some of the rest of them wanted to have their own apartments or their own houses as well. For,
Interesting.
for example, the Crane family, Crane Plumbing from Chicago, they built a magnificent house on the island. And it was I've forgotten, it was something like 12 bathrooms in it. I guess if you're the Cranes, that's what you do. But they also had liveried footmen in uniform, and the other families thought that was rather pretentious. They thought that everybody on the island could have those if we wanted, but we're not going to go quite that far. So there was this sort of subtle socialization that went on. What was accepted and what was not.
Interesting. So would you say the majority of the members were from the Eastern Seaboard or New York, but they had some from Chicago? And was
Yep.
it just Chicago and New York, or was it also?
No, most were from New York. The second number would have been from Chicago, but there certainly were other members, people from like Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, um, but not
Interesting.
really West Coast people. Obviously, it wouldn't have made sense for them to come all the way to the east to go to a place on the ocean.
And I guess Florida wasn't as developed as it is now, so maybe it's not the demographics of America were different back then, as I is my guess.
Very
Okay, yeah,
different
yeah.
indeed.
And this is kind of like, I mean, it's post Civil War too. Is that kind of, I mean, this is the South. Did
Right.
that factor into it? Into
Exactly. 1886 is when all this started, and of course the Civil War was 1861 to 65. But once it was over, and there were no servants, there were no slaves. I mean, people couldn't farm on Jekyll, and that's why the owners got together, the two families, and said, "Let's sell this to Northerners. Let's sell this as a private club." And of course, it ended up being a great idea.
And there's a connection to British royalty. I found that interesting reading through the book. There were two well-dressed men in there
Those are
that
the Work twins. Yeah, Francis Work and his twin. They were both members. One was they had been classmates at Harvard. One was president of the Harvard Club in Paris. One the Harvard Club in London. But his great granddaughter was Diana, Princess of Wales. So there's a great connection there. The name, in fact, Diana's name was Diana Frances, and she was named for her mother, her American grandfather, and her American great grandmother, all of whom were
wow,
named Frances.
I didn't know that. See, I didn't know she had an American heritage. That means her son, Charles, apparently King Charles is not doing great
Right.
health wise. So that means there is a connection to Jekyll Island if William uh, becomes, I mean, Prince of Wales is William, right? So
Exactly. And interestingly enough, his American great grandfather, the one with all the money, the one whose grandsons were members here, he hated the whole concept of American women marrying titled husbands, just thought it was terrible. And when I do a talk about Princess Diana, I always end with a quote from the American great grandfather, basically saying, "All of these people should be taken out and shot. You know, nobody should do this. This is something that we should be doing." And
oh,
so, as you
interesting.
said, it's interesting that his direct descendant will, of course, one day be king of Great Britain.
Be an part American. Wow, that's really incredible. I didn't know that. That's the same thing too. Like a lot of people don't know Churchill's mother was American too. So
Jenny,
they're
that's right. She and her two sisters, the good, the beautiful, and the witty, as they were the three of them referred to.
wow, that's interesting. There's a lot more cross pollination between the. I mean, I guess the Anglo. This I guess you could call this the Anglo American establishment, but more American than Anglo. I would say. Would that be fair?
Exactly. Although most of them would certainly go to Europe relatively often. For some of them would go every year. But yeah, it was very interchangeable. For example, the Goulds were members. Two of the Gould brothers of Jay Gould's sons, and both of those families married into titled European families as well. So you could certainly have been in at lunch at the Connaught in London, and reach across and see another member of the Jekyll Island Club sitting not far away.
Wow. That was a thing. I think the Astors really wanted to. I mean, they were rich here, but I think they coveted those titles and wanted to be closer to the English. I don't think it's as fashionable these days, but back then I think it was much more fashionable. There's overlaps with the Pilgrim Society probably here and
Exactly,
all kinds of things on here.
particularly for the families of newer wealth. I mean, for example, the Astors were considered old wealth, the Vanderbilts were considered new, and so if these women couldn't break into New York society, they would say, "Well, we're going off to Europe then, and then I'll come back with a daughter who's a duchess, and they'll have to receive me."
Right,
And
interesting.
that's exactly what happened.
Those are like the stresses of the very rich, the new like the nouveau riche, super rich, as opposed to
Exactly.
the old super rich.
Yeah, I don't know
Um,
if you ever watched the series Gilded Age on television,
I
but
need to watch it. I'm
they
really interested in that part of history.
well,
But
they have a lot of the same things back and forth. For example, Mrs. Astor, who was the undisputed social queen, she had a factotum, a good friend named Ward McAllister, and he was the person who decided who got into society and who didn't. He's the one who wrote the list of the 400, as it was called, and he was from Savannah, and so he came by it honestly, I guess. He decided that after the war was over, he went north and was able to use some of his experience there. And as I said, became Mrs. Astor's closest advisor.
wow, interesting. The list of 400s. Does that overlap with the social register? I don't know. I don't know some
It
of these
it
things.
does indeed. In fact, the first social register was 1889,
Okay, so it's
and
right
so
around that time.
most of the members of the club would have been there as well.
Fascinating. So this is it. So they are exclusive. They're excluding people, but they're also. Would you say that there's a pecking order amongst this crew? Like you said, Astor's on top. I mean, did they? Were there people that they? I don't know. I guess what was the total membership at its height? Do you know offhand?
Um, somewhere around 100 people.
That's it.
There were 100 shares that were sold, and as I said, later some were divided. You could do a half share, that sort of thing. But in the beginning, it was 100 shares, and all of them, of course, wanted to be members. I mean, as soon as that first group came down for the visit, where all of the animals had been put on the island, so many that, as I said, you couldn't trip without seeing a deer or something. They came down and saw it. The weather was perfect. The food was wonderful. And they said, what's not to like? And so that was the beginning of it.
Wow, interesting. And it's still 65% wildlands, correct?
Exactly. By law, only 35% of the island can be developed. For a while, there were some people trying to say that the golf courses shouldn't be included in that number because that's not natural. That's natural land. Well, no, it's not. If you're walking on a golf course, that is not natural land. So they've been very good about keeping the 65% rule on the island as well.
All right. So it's only about 3 miles north south, mile across, if that. So it's not very vast, I would say.
Exactly. And of course, north of it is St. Simon's and Sea Island, both of which were developed later, but also very expensive and socially prominent places as well.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. So you have 100 families. Do you feel? Are you aware that it's kind of had a continuity of use, or is it tapered off, or is it still in 2025? Kind of these families have still
Well,
maintained it.
interesting you should ask that because in the early 40s, 1940s, getting servants was difficult. A lot of the people had gone off to be in to be in the war, and so someone spotted a German submarine off the coast of Jekyll, and suddenly the U.S. government was very scared because they said, if all of these families are here at one time, that represents 1/5 of the nation's wealth
Wow.
just from these 100 families. And so, what if they tried to, God forbid, kill them or kidnap them? So the federal government condemned the island, closed it down, and so that meant that there was really nothing else going on there, particularly during the war years. And then after the war, it went down and down and down. Finally, the state of Georgia bought it and decided that they would build a bridge over, and it would become a place that everybody could come and visit. It would not be so exclusive as it once had been.
So it's partially open to the public, and the club is still there, but there's
The club is now a very nice hotel. They do a great
wow.
job there. You can also stay in some of the cottages. I mentioned the Crane's cottage, which is so lovely. You can stay there.
Just saw it, yeah.
A lot of people like to do their weddings there because that's
Wow.
Crane right there that you're showing. There's a beautiful little chapel with Tiffany stained glass windows that's right in the middle of the historic district, and so you could have your family stay here, have the wedding there, the reception there, and have everything take place without ever leaving the island.
Wow, nice. So it's still kind of like a coveted place to be at. It's just not as exclusive, I
It
guess.
is. One of the things I remember very fondly was about, I don't know, 20 years ago, I convinced the Rockefellers that they needed to come down and see the island. And the young man I was dealing with at the time, a really nice guy named Kim Elliman, who's a Rockefeller descendant, he said, "Look, I'm not trying to be difficult, but the family had lots of houses. Why should this one be any different?" And I said, "If you'll come down, you'll see. I promise you will." So when the family came down, we had a cocktail party for them sitting on the porch of their cottage, of their house, with ice sculptures and oysters on the half shell and all that. And Kim looked at me at one point and he said, "Now I understand." When he'd said to me, "Why should we care about this one?" I said, "Come down and you'll see." So it's really nice that that place has been rediscovered by some of these families.
That's cool. Here's the cute little chapel here. That's a
Yep.
perfect place to have a little wedding. And I see the cottages there. I had a question. I forgot what it was. These so it's like little cottages. Were those present when it was being used? Those cottages.
They were indeed. And the families who built them usually didn't give them up. They would have other friends maybe who would come and stay. But now all of those cottages are part of the whole project. Some of them, as I said, are available for staying. Others are just part of like a museum, that kind of thing. One of the interesting things, there's an old phone booth, and people come on the island and they say, "Why is there a phone booth here?" Well, it's there specifically to commemorate the fact that the first transatlantic phone call, transcontinental telephone call, was made from Jekyll. William Vail, who was the president of AT&T, he was on Jekyll Island along with J.P. Morgan Jr. The president of the United States was on the phone in Washington, and the assistant, remember old Mr. Watson? Remember when
Yes.
Edison said, "Come here, Watson, I need you"? He was out in California. And so they had a full telephone call, and it was all done from Jekyll. And it's because Vail was a member, and because he thought, well, why not do it from here?
Wow, right. That makes perfect sense. There's an Indian mound there. Was there old burial sites and Indian kind of presence on the island? Were you aware of that?
There were, and there were also some sort of pre-colonial houses and cemeteries, and all of those things, of course, have been protected. The early buildings there were made by something called tabby, which looks great. It's sort of crushed shells along with sand, but unfortunately, it doesn't weather very well over the years. And so some of those buildings that were made from tabby early on have had to be repaired or even rebuilt because, as I said, it's just not something that can take that wind and the rain for all of those
Years, right.
decades.
I mean, I assume that this is like weather where there's hurricanes and things like that. So
Exactly. Yeah.
gets hit by all that stuff.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, great book. And I like the layout. The fit and finish of the book is awesome. Like it's got a lot of names. You go through all these different families, and the pictures really tell a story all its own. I think it really helps seal that time and like your mind frame. And just some of these characters, you can tell their characters by their pictures. And
Yeah, one of my favorites was that these families would bring their minister down with them to be their guest to stay. If they're going to be there for 6 weeks, and a minister would take turns speaking at the pulpit in the little church on Sunday. But the Episcopal Bishop of Massachusetts was there, and he was going along, and evidently he saw somebody. He stopped because he saw somebody with a flat tire in their car. And he got out of the car and he said to the young man, "May I help you?" And the young man was cursing. And so the minister, he was actually a bishop, said to him, "Young man, do you think you can try doing it without taking the name of the Lord in vain?" And the man said, "Sure." So he took one huge turn and it came off. And the bishop said, "Well, I'll be goddamned."
Nice. Good. Yeah, I mean, it's really an interesting part of that history. Like 1/5 of the Americans' wealth there is really something else. I think that
Yeah.
is pretty telling. I mean, is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed? I mean, where can people find the book? And
No, the book has been out of print for quite a while. I mean, if somebody's still interested, I'd be glad to help them find a copy. But it really is worth your while to go there now. I would not suggest going in August when it is so incredibly humid. But if you go January through April, it's always heaven. It really is.
nice. And it looks like they have some historical kind of buildings and things you can see there. Like there's
Oh,
museums
absolutely.
and
Yeah, there's a movie, a video to get you started, to bring you up to date on the history. You can walk through and see like the red bugs, the little golf carts I talked about. You can see all of those things. And then there's also a great turtle rescue center there, because these little turtles leave hundreds and hundreds of eggs on the beach. And then they go out into the ocean. And so you can actually go there and see the ones who, for example, have been damaged. For example, if a rudder has cut one of their legs, they will take the turtle, keep it, make it better, and then finally release it when it's able to go out on its own.
nursing back to health. Yeah. So if you guys are in the area, go check out Jekyll Island, and also go check out Richard Hutto's books. This one is The Gilded Cage. And then the other one we talked about 2 weeks ago is The Countess and the Nazi, An American Family's Private War. And remind me what your website is again. It's thecountess.net, right?
Yeah, thecountess.net for that one. And then for my other, they could just go to rickhutto.com.
Yeah, but
RICKHUTTO.com.
and I'll put those two links in the show notes. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I appreciate the opportunity, though. It's always good to talk about Georgia.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great, a little piece of history, and it's so important, like American history and all these connections, and so many people like they did such great public works, like you mentioned. The New York Public Library is incredible, and so many
Exactly.
buildings and so much creative stuff came out of that. So
Great.
thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, have a great weekend.
You
Stay
too.
there.
Bye.
Stay there. Stay there. Stay there.